The screenshot was taped to the door like a receipt. No note. No bag. No key. Just a printed image of an email that said, "We're done. Please don't contact me." It was signed, Mark, like a business memo, not the end of a marriage. I stood there, in my funeral dress, mascara dried on my cheeks, arms empty from burying my mother. 12 years of marriage, and all I got was a screenshot taped with scotch tape. The house key no longer fit. The lock had been changed. He left me the way people discard expired things, with quiet detachment. The screenshot wasn't even from a real email. It was a draft. I saw the Gmail bar at the top. He never even had the decency to send it. Just printed his silence and left it behind. He kept the ring. Mine was still on my finger, swollen from grief. His had disappeared, just like him. I looked at the house like it was unfamiliar. Same porch. Same plants I watered. But there were no welcome mats. No memory of me. Even the wind chimes were gone. He had erased me in 2 days. While I stood by my mother's grave, reading her name. He packed our life like luggage. The neighbors watched from behind curtains. No one waved. No one opened a door. Someone had helped him move. Someone had seen. I was the last to know. Even strangers had more context than I did. 12 years reduced to a digital image and an empty driveway. No boxes. No goodbis. No explanation. I stood there for 22 minutes. Long enough for a neighbor's car to return, park, and reverse. Long enough to realize he planned it. The timing wasn't random, it was cruelly strategic. He waited until I was vulnerable, far away, surrounded by death. He wanted to disappear without the burden of my voice. And he did. My phone buzzed once in my purse. It was a calendar reminder. Dinner with Mom and Mark. I stared at it until it blurred. Dinner? With who? One was dead. The other had vanished. And I was standing in the middle of the street, holding grief in both hands. My body ached from 2 kinds of loss. I didn't knock. I didn't call. What could I say that hadn't already been ignored? He had spoken clearly, through absence. I slid the screenshot off the door. Folded it once. Put it in my purse like a receipt for a transaction I never agreed to. The sky started to dim, and I realized I had nowhere to go. The house I grew up in was now empty. The house I built with him was now locked. I was between histories, unwanted in both. Grief doesn't always scream. Sometimes it just waits. Waits for a door to open that never will. Waits for someone to say your name like it still matters. I drove back to a motel I never planned to stay in. The room smelled like bleach and distance. I sat on the bed in the same black dress, the funeral one. It still had a crease from the morning. The screenshot was on the nightstand, next to my mother's obituary. 2 endings in 1 day. And both. Without warning. I stared at my phone, tempted to text him. But what do you send to a man who doesn't have the decency to speak? What could I possibly say that would land? He didn't want a reaction, he wanted to vanish. And I wasn't going to give him what he wanted. Not my tears. Not my confusion. I took off the dress, folded it slowly. I didn't cry. My body didn't have the water left. I lay down in silence, still wearing the wedding ring. I should have taken it off. But I needed something that still acknowledged I existed. Even if it was just metal. Even if it was just habit. Even if he already took his off days ago. I turned the lights off but didn't sleep. Just stared at the ceiling fan turning like time, useless and loud. Everything had changed in less than 48 hours. My mother's voice was gone. My husband's voice was never coming back. But mine? I hadn't used it yet. At 4:17 a.m., I got up and wrote down everything I remembered. Every detail of how he had started drifting, every moment I had excused. I didn't write it for closure. I wrote it for record. Because women like me don't forget, we archive. I wasn't planning revenge. I was building memory. And memory is louder than any goodbye. I stared at the screenshot again. He didn't even sign his full name. Just Mark. Like he wasn't part of my history. Like he hadn't been in every birthday photo, every doctor's visit, every Christmas. But if he wanted to disappear, I'd let him. Eventually. But not without being remembered. We met at a conference on ethics in finance, of all places. I was speaking on the moral responsibility of literature. He was in the back row, nodding along like he understood every metaphor. Afterward, he told me, "You speak like you've lived 3 lives." I remember blushing, not because of the compliment, but because someone listened. He asked to walk me to my hotel. I let him. That was the first yes in a long line of yes I didn't question. Mark was charming in the way quiet men can be, observant, precise. He remembered my coffee order after one date. He sent books to my office with handwritten notes inside the covers. He didn't rush. He moved with intention. I mistook stillness for depth. He never made big promises, just small ones he always kept. And that made me feel safe. We got married a year later, small ceremony, nothing extravagant. My mother cried when she saw me in my dress. He whispered, "You're home," when he placed the ring on my finger. I believed him. Not because he was convincing, but because I wanted to believe someone. I had spent so long holding everyone else up. I thought it was finally my turn. The first few years were quiet and soft. We cooked together. He made spreadsheets. I read poetry aloud. He'd brush my hair back from my face during dinner. It felt like a love built on pauses, not noise. Our fights were rare, solved in low voices and long silences. I called it maturity. But silence can also be rehearsal for abandonment. I helped him start his private consulting firm. Used my own savings to cover our first year of rent when clients were slow. He told me, "You believe in me more than anyone ever has." I did. Even when it meant scaling back my own dreams. I took fewer speaking gigs, more online classes. Because I thought partnership meant adjusting your volume for the other. We never had children. Not because we didn't try. I had 2 miscarriages. 1 surgery. He held my hand at the hospital both times. But never spoke of it again after we got home. I learned to cry in the bathroom with the water running. He learned to stay in his office longer at night. Neither of us asked if the other was okay. He started spending more time traveling. Client meetings, networking dinners, silent weekends. He brought me souvenirs from airports instead of stories. Each one came with a smile, a thought of you, but none of them smelled like presents. Just obligation wrapped in paper. I displayed them anyway. We had traditions: Friday night takeout, Sunday walks, anniversary letters. Over time, they became more memory than habit. He forgot the letters 2 years in a row. I wrote mine anyway, folded them, and placed them in his drawer. He never mentioned them. I never asked why. That was the rhythm we lived in, unsaid, unseen. When my mother got sick, things shifted again. I spent more time in her home, helping with meals, driving to appointments. He said, "Take all the time you need." But I needed him, too. He stopped asking about her. Stopped offering to visit. Said it was too hard to see someone fading like that. I slept in the guest room more often, not from anger, but fatigue. He never joined me. Never knocked. I kept thinking he was giving me space. Now I know it was distance. Not kindness. He was moving out of our life piece by piece. And I thanked him for the courtesy. He once said, "You're too wrapped up in death lately." It was the week Mom started hospice. I said nothing. What do you say to a man who thinks grief is a personality flaw? I stopped trying to explain pain to someone who avoided it. He stopped calling it our life. Started referring to my plans and your situation. We had our last real conversation 6 weeks before the funeral. I asked if we were okay. He said, "You're tired." I'm tired. Let's just get through this part. I mistook endurance for love. Thought surviving meant we were still together. He kissed my forehead before leaving for a trip. I didn't know he wouldn't come back. The day before the funeral, he sent flowers for my mother. No card. No name. Just white lilies with the message, "Peace, always." I had to ask the florist who placed the order. It was him. He paid for her send-off, but not for staying. That was his final gesture, floral, distant, silent. I wore black to the service. He wore silence. Didn't show up. Didn't send a message. I assumed it was grief. But grief shows up even when it limps. He wasn't mourning. He was moving, and when I returned from the funeral, tired, emptied, dusted in ashes, he was gone. No trace. No call. No bag. Just the screenshot on the door. No name. No full sentence. Just a draft. Just like our marriage, unfinished and unsigned. The first time he missed dinner without a text, I made excuses for him. He's just overwhelmed, I told myself. But overwhelmed became the norm. Missed calls, cold replies, dinners eaten alone in silence. He no longer apologized, just shrugged. The warmth left gradually, like light slipping out from under a door. And I kept calling it shadow. He stopped noticing the things he used to praise. My new haircut. My favorite perfume. Even the red scarf he once said made me look like fall in motion. Now, he barely looked up. Just said, "Did you need something?" As if I were interrupting, not existing. I told myself marriage goes through seasons. But winter shouldn't last years. He traveled more, but packed lighter. His toothbrush no longer returned from trips. I once found a woman's bracelet in his luggage. He said it was a client's, left behind after a lunch meeting. I laughed nervously. He didn't. He just zipped the bag and said, "Don't be paranoid." The silence after that was colder than the bracelet. I started finding receipts that didn't match his calendar. Dinners for 2 at places I'd never been. Rooms in cities I didn't know he visited. He always had an answer, too smooth, too quick. But explanations without eye contact are warnings. And I was becoming fluent in that language. Still, I swallowed my suspicions like glass. He once came home from a client dinner, smelling like a new cologne. Not the one I gave him, he said. It was a free sample from a hotel. I said nothing. The lie wasn't the worst part. It was how easily he wore it. Like he'd rehearsed 1,000 exits, the anniversary we skipped, because of work, I planned it anyway. Made reservations, lit candles, wore the red dress he once loved. He walked in late, saw the table, and said, "I told you not tonight." I laughed like it was nothing. He opened his laptop in the other room. I ate alone. Blew out the candle. Myself. He never asked how dinner was. He began calling me, Ev. Not Yves, like when we first met. Not baby. Not love. Just Ev, flat, short, functional. Like a placeholder. I became a syllable, not a person. Even the way he said my name started to shrink me. I still responded. That was the worst part. He started locking his phone. Turned it face down at dinner. Took it with him to the shower. Said clients were becoming paranoid about confidentiality. I wasn't a client. I was his wife. But he handled me like a liability. I stopped asking. He stopped pretending. I once saw a notification flash on his screen, "Taylor, miss you already." He swiped it away so fast it blurred. I asked, "Who's Taylor?" He said, "My assistant's new intern." He didn't look up from his screen. And I didn't press. Because deep down, I already knew when my mother's condition worsened. He grew more distant. He said he didn't do hospitals. Said, grief drains him. I didn't realize until later, he meant my grief. He started leaving the house earlier, coming back later. And when I cried, he said, "You need to stay strong." I wanted to scream, "For who?" But didn't. Claire, my colleague, once said. He's so polite. So composed. I nodded. Because that's how he practiced cruelty. He never yelled. He just disappeared while still in the room. Every cold sentence sounded professional. He made detachment feel rational. Like it was my expectations that were too high. He stopped joining me at my mother's house. Said, "She doesn't really notice me anymore anyway." It was true. The dementia had started. But I noticed. And I never forgot that sentence. It haunted me more than the empty bed. Because love shows up, even when it's not convenient. He left the grocery list on the counter once with only 3 items: milk, eggs. Silence. I stared at the third word for 10 minutes. He said it was a typo. I said nothing. But I saved the list. Some mistakes aren't accidents. The last time we touched was out of routine. A kiss on the forehead. No hands. No pause. Like pressing a button on a machine. He used to hold my face like it was fragile. Now he avoided it like it was fire. And maybe it was. Maybe I was still too alive for him. When my mother died, he sent a text, "Let me know if you need anything." That was it. No call. No visit. Just silence sent through a screen. I needed a husband. He gave me a message. And 2 days later, an empty house. The funeral ended at 4:12 p.m. By 6:35 p.m., I was back in the car, still in black, still holding my mother's scarf. I hadn't cried during the service. I was too hollow for grief. But when I turned the corner onto our street and saw the empty driveway, something cracked. His car was gone. And something inside me knew before I even opened the door. I reached the front steps and saw it, a single sheet of printer paper, taped crookedly to the wood. Not a letter. Not a handwritten goodbye. Just a screenshot, an email draft that was never sent. It said, "This isn't working anymore. Please don't contact me. I've moved on. No, dear Evelyn." No signature. Just sterile words and betrayal masked as formality. I checked the doorknob. It didn't turn. The lock had been changed. My name was still on the mortgage, but not on the key. He erased me from the home I paid half for. Not with words. With locksmiths and silence. I stood there, breath frozen, wondering how much of me he had already packed. Turns out, all of me. I knocked once. Not because I expected him to answer, but because some part of me still believed in decency. No answer. Just quiet walls and a house stripped of my presence. I peered through the window. The photos were gone. The books we collected together? Replaced. Even the couch had changed. He hadn't just left, he'd curated a new space, one where I never existed. He didn't move out. He moved forward. While I stood in mourning clothes, holding ashes and a door handle that no longer turned. He used my grief as camouflage. And I never saw him leave. I called his phone. Straight to voicemail. I texted once, "Mark. I'm home." No response. The message stayed delivered, untouched, unread. I scrolled through our old messages for a sign of who we used to be. The last one he'd sent said, "Don't forget to get more almond milk." The message before that? A week old. I drove to a motel near the freeway, still in my funeral dress. Checked in under my maiden name for the first time in years. The receptionist asked, "One night?" I nodded. But I knew I wouldn't sleep. Inside, I sat on the edge of the bed with two things in my lap, my mother's obituary and the screenshot that I zoomed in. He hadn't even spell-checked it. There was a typo in the second line. He took the time to print and tape it, but not to reread it. 12 years. Together. And I wasn't worth a second glance. Even his rejection was lazy. But the damage was surgical. I checked his Instagram, something I rarely did. His profile picture was new. A photo of him at a rooftop bar, no ring, no caption. But I saw her in the background. Taylor. I recognized her from a company party too. Years ago. She had asked what I did for a living. I told her I made men readable. She laughed too long, his story was blank. His presence, wiped. But hers? Hers had a champagne glass. Caption, nothing like fresh beginnings bottle with popping cork. Posted the same day I buried my mother. Her nails matched the dress I'd once complimented. He wasn't hiding. He just chose someone quieter, younger, more convenient. I stared at their world from behind a screen. My entire life rewritten in pixels. I wasn't angry yet. I was just humiliated, to be replaced mid-funeral. To be left with a screenshot and no home. To realize I'd been dismissed while distracted by death. He didn't delete me. He archived me. Filed me under finished and hit close. No confrontation. No apology. Just a vanished man and a photo he never meant me to see. But I did. And I saved it. I called his assistant the next morning. Asked if he'd be returning to the office. She paused. Then said, "He's on leave. Relocated for personal reasons." She didn't ask if I was okay. Just hung up quickly, as if I were contagious. I was. Grief contaminates everyone who pretends it isn't real. I took off my wedding ring 3 days later. Not in anger. In precision. Left it on the motel dresser, next to the room key. It looked small there. Out of place. Like something that didn't belong to me anymore. He kept his. But mine had meaning. I didn't cry at first. I paced. I wrote. I rewrote. Every version of a message I'd never send. Every sentence started with, "How could you," and ended with silence. But the silence always won. Because there's no punctuation for abandonment. Only pauses that stretch into days. The motel mirror became a witness. I stared into it at night, trying to see what he stopped seeing. Was I too tired? Too sad? Too full of my mother's death and not enough of his ego? I tried to trace the moment I stopped being a woman to him. And started being a burden. But the timeline blurred. I ate instant noodles for breakfast. Not because I was hungry. But because it gave my hands something to do. Grief has no appetite, only habits. I drank tea that tasted like cardboard. Watched water boil and thought about how fast things vanish. How heat, like love, disappears when left unattended. I slept in fragments, 20-minute intervals between memories. My mother's laugh. Mark's last touch. The cold doorknob that no longer turned. I'd wake up gasping for something that no longer existed. Checked my phone for messages. There were none. I stopped answering friends. Didn't tell. Then what happened? What do you say? He moved out during my mother's funeral? It sounds like fiction. Like melodrama. But it was my Monday. And no one knew how to respond to that kind of truth. I walked to the pharmacy for toothpaste. Past a wedding dress store. Stopped in front of the window and stared at the mannequins. They looked frozen. Like I felt. Dressed for a future someone else had promised. And then disappeared from. I kept walking. Slower, grief layered itself. Losing her. Losing him. Losing the life I thought I had. And underneath it all, losing the version of myself who still believed people don't vanish without saying goodbye. She died too. Quietly. At checkout, the motel clerk asked if I'd be extending my stay. I nodded. Paid for 3 more nights. I didn't want to go home. Because I no longer had one. I had a name on a mortgage and no key. I had memories inside walls that now rejected me. So I stayed. Between nowhere and after. I opened a new notebook. Started writing facts. Dates. Expenses. Emails. This wasn't journaling. It was documentation. Because pain is a feeling, but proof is a plan. On day 6, I went back to my mother's house. It still smelled like her. Lavender and wood polish and old paperbacks. I lay on her bed and said nothing. Just listened to the quiet. And felt, for the first time, a different kind of grief. The kind that makes room. I took out the screenshot and burned it in her fireplace. Watched the edges curl inward, like regret. He left it like a statement. I ended it like a sentence. No drama. No scream. Just fire. And finality. I found her old pearl earrings in the drawer. Put them on. Not because of beauty. But because she always wore them when she needed strength. That night, I slept a full hour for the first time. Dreamed of silence that didn't hurt. Dreamed of space that didn't echo with his name. The next morning, I made eggs. Set the table for one. Folded the napkin. Liaconde. Small ceremony for the woman I used to be. The one who waited. The one who questioned. She didn't show up. And I didn't miss her. I stopped wearing black. Not because the morning ended, but because I wanted to feel color again. Even if it hurt. Even if it was loud. Even if it reminded me I was still alive. And still capable of choosing. I sat on the porch that evening and watched the wind move through the trees. It didn't ask permission. It didn't apologize. It just moved. And for the first time in weeks, I wanted to follow it. Not to find him, but to find whatever came next. It started with the bank statement. I wasn't looking for answers. I was just trying to cancel joint bills. But there it was, an automatic transfer to a rental account in another city. The name on the lease? Mark Monroe. The date? 2 weeks before my mother passed. He didn't move suddenly. He had planned my replacement before my goodbye. I called the number listed under the account, pretending to be a future tenant. A woman answered. Cheerful. Young voice. Said the unit was taken by a lovely couple just moved in. Lovely couple. My stomach turned, but I kept my voice calm. She mentioned the name, Taylor, casually. As if I should know it. I hung up without saying goodbye. And for the first time, I didn't cry. I opened my laptop, pulled up every shared file we ever created. Trip itineraries, receipts, grocery lists, even playlists. Then I opened a new folder, evidence. Because the truth wasn't just betrayal. It was premeditated. Emails began to connect the timeline. He'd been requesting time off under personal family emergency the same weeks I was caring for my mother. One message to his assistant said, she won't notice. She's too distracted. I printed that one first. Underlined it and read. I wasn't too distracted. I was too loyal. There's a difference. I checked our investment account next. He had withdrawn $12,000 in March, unexplained. The same week Taylor posted a weekend getaway photo at a coastal resort. I zoomed in. The wine glass. The fireplace. The sweater he once called mine. He didn't just take the money. He took the setting I had once imagined for our anniversary. And gave it to someone else. I checked the car GPS history. The last 10 destinations were all unfamiliar. Except one, a flower shop. The same one that delivered the lilies for my mother's funeral. He ordered them in person. 30 minutes after closing a rental agreement with Taylor. Grief and betrayal, scheduled on the same afternoon. His LinkedIn status changed, relocated to expand new ventures. He looked tan. Relaxed. He had updated his bio to remove the word husband. But mine still said wife. So I changed it. Not to divorced. To author of my own survival. I met with a lawyer the next morning. She reviewed the screenshots, the receipts, the email. She didn't blink. This isn't a man who left. This is a man who erased. She called it abandonment with evidence. Said we wouldn't just file for divorce. We'd file with strategy. Turns out, he hadn't removed me from the business license we co-filed 5 years ago. I was still legally entitled to 50% of the consulting firm. The one he built using my income in the first 2 years. He thought I wouldn't check. Thought I'd be too broken. But broken women remember everything. Especially numbers. We froze the joint accounts. Redirected all automatic transfers to a secure holding. I watched the notifications roll in, transaction declined, transfer blocked. He texted me for the first time in weeks, hey, is something wrong with the bank? I didn't answer. But I smiled. Because silence with proof is louder than any scream. I found his new address in the lease files. Typed it into Google Maps. And there it was, a modern loft, floor-to-ceiling windows. No curtains. All performance. I didn't need to go there. I just needed to know it existed. So I could prove I had been replaced with intention. I wrote a single letter. No emotion. Just numbers. Dates. Facts. Attached copies of the lease, his emails, my claim to the firm. Sent it to his lawyer, not to him. Because men like Mark understand. Documents more than disappointment. And I was done explaining my pain to someone who cashed it in. Let the paper speak now. Claire, a mutual friend, called and said, I didn't know it was this bad. I said, it's worse. Then hung up. Because pity isn't healing. And I didn't need sympathy. I needed justice. And I was building it silently. I didn't show up at his new place. I didn't call. I didn't threaten. I just mailed the legal documents to his building's leasing office, signature required. The receptionist signed for them at 9:42 a.m. He would have seen them during breakfast, probably with her. I imagined his hands trembling, not from guilt, but from realizing I had receipts. The petition was clear, divorce on grounds of abandonment and financial misconduct. Claim to joint assets. Formal request for half of the firm. A file of proof. So detailed it read like a court-ready confession. I didn't use adjectives. Only dates, transactions, images. Because revenge doesn't need rage, just accuracy. And I was surgically precise. I scheduled a meeting with the firm's board. Told them my name was still on the documents. Told them I wasn't contesting him, I was claiming what was mine. They didn't blink. They nodded. Because men like Mark. Forget the women who built them. Until she shows up with a signature and a folder. He called once. I didn't answer. His voicemail said, I wish you would have talked to me before escalating. Escalating? As if pain were a minor incident. As if I'd skipped a step. But he skipped every step of decency. So I skipped explanation. He sent flowers. A weak bouquet of white roses and an unsigned note, I'm sorry. I let them rot on my doorstep. Watched each petal fall like his lies. I didn't throw them out. I let them wilt in silence. Because decay deserves to be seen. I walked into the lawyer's office for mediation wearing a navy dress and my mother's pearls. He looked smaller in person, tired, tense. He wouldn't meet my eyes. Taylor didn't come. But her absence was loud. His lawyer spoke for him. Mine spoke for me, half the business. Full financial restitution. Ownership of the old house. He hadn't removed my name from the deed either. I gave it back. Told him, I don't want your leftovers. Let him live inside the walls that heard me cry. Let the house keep my ghost. The judge signed everything in under 10 minutes. No trial. No testimony. Just finality. He looked at me once, like he wanted to say something. But I stood, gathered my coat, and walked out. He blinked, and I was already gone. Just like he'd taught me. A week later, I made my own post. A single image, a burning envelope in a fireplace. No caption. No hashtags. But everyone who needed to know, understood. I didn't need attention. Just closure. And fire gave me both. Mutual friends reached out. Said they were so sorry. I replied to no one. Because this wasn't about pity or performance. This was about reclaiming my story. And they weren't part of the ending. Just curious bystanders. He sent a final message, you didn't have to destroy me. I didn't reply. But I whispered, you did that yourself. I just documented it. With dates. With silence. With strength. Because some endings don't explode. They expire. I booked a ticket to Scotland. My mother always dreamed of going. I packed one bag. Left no forwarding address. Because freedom doesn't ask for permission. It just leaves. And I was already halfway gone. The night before I left, I sat on her porch one last time. Held the earrings she gave me, now mine for good. Listened to the wind and whispered, he tried to disappear. But I erased him better. With proof. With grace. Scotland was colder than I expected, but it didn't bother me. The wind on my face felt like baptism, sharp, honest, cleansing. I walked alone through cobbled streets, no ring, no timeline. I didn't check my phone. Didn't explain myself. The silence wasn't empty anymore. It was mine. And for the first time, I wasn't waiting for anything. I stayed in a small cottage overlooking the hills. No TV. No distractions. Just breath and space. I wrote again, fiction, poetry, pieces of myself I'd tucked away. I cooked for one, danced barefoot, read books without finishing them. Not because I was lost. But because healing has no deadline. And peace makes room for pauses. I lit a candle for my mother every night. Not to mourn. To honor. Because even in her final days, she taught me that silence holds power. That some things are said better by what you don't chase. I stopped chasing closure. And let it find me instead. I received a letter from the firm, an offer to consult remotely. They said they admired my clarity. I accepted. Not because of the money. But because the world had finally learned to address me directly. Without him. Without apology. I moved into a new apartment back home, a smaller space, all white walls and light. I filled it slowly, books I chose, linens I loved, art that spoke my name. No shared tastes. No compromises. Just my fingerprint on every inch. It smelled like lavender and ink. It felt like return. People asked how I was. I said, better. Not great. Not fixed. Just honest. Because better means I didn't break the way he expected. It means I bled, but didn't beg. It means I lived. One morning, I saw his name flash across a news alert, the firm restructured. His title removed. A quiet fall. No scandal. No drama. Just absence. The kind he once used as a weapon. Now turned back on him. Poetic, really. Claire invited me to a gathering, I declined. Because healing doesn't mean revisiting places you've outgrown. It means drawing a line and decorating the side you Stand on. Let them gather in nostalgia. I was busy building a future. One room, one truth at a time. I started mentoring women. Not professionally, quietly. Coffee dates, long walks, emails that began with "I understand." Because pain is a language. And I was fluent now. Not in suffering, in recovery. My reflection changed. Not because I looked different, but because I finally recognized the woman staring back. Not a placeholder. Not a ghost. Not a backup plan. A blueprint. I wore her earrings to dinner alone one evening. Ordered wine without asking anyone's preference. Toasted to no one. And it felt full. Because some toasts don't need witnesses. Only intention. Only peace. I passed the old house once, out of curiosity, not longing. The porch light was off. The plants were dead. The curtains were closed. He'd locked me out of that life. But he also locked himself into the screenshot? I framed the corner of it. Just one line. The date. The time. The timestamp of his disappearance. Next to it, a quote my mother once wrote in the margin of a book: "Let him leave. But take your name with you." And I did. Fully. Finally. Fiercely. I didn't rebuild the same life. I created a new one. One that doesn't apologize for being too much, too soft, too knowing. I carry no revenge now. Only record. Only resurrection. And that, he'll never touch because he kept the ring. But I kept everything else. My dignity. My silence. My proof. He left with an exit. I stayed with the story. And this time, I wrote the ending.